Hey guys, Kyle here from Berkshire Worms. Today we're going to be making a compost tea from our worm castings. I just pulled 1 cup of worm castings out of our worm bin. The fresher the better. We're trying to cultivate as much microbial activity as possible. So by pulling this out of our worm bin just now, we have lots of microbial activity. We will also be using an air pump. We use the air pump to agitate the water and add a lot of oxygen into it. We're trying to get as much aerobic bacteria as possible. The aerobic bacteria will do well in an oxygenated environment. We want to limit the anaerobic bacteria in our environment. They can be harmful to us and our plants and our pets. So by agitating it as much as possible, we're limiting our risk for anaerobic bacteria developing. We use organic molasses as our sugar source. You need a sugar source to feed your bacteria. The sugars will allow the bacteria to continue to reproduce. They'll colonize their environment based on their food source, so as long as you have enough carbohydrates in there, they'll keep reproducing. And we want as much bacteria and beneficial microbial activity as possible. So we use half a tablespoon per gallon of molasses. We have 4 gallons in here. It's our 5-gallon bucket. We don't fill it all the way up because there's a lot of bubbling. So you can kind of see here from the last tea, I overfilled it and it splattered everywhere. So don't forget your lid either. We'll get to it. We're just going to be using our worm castings today. If you like, you can get pretty complex with your tea recipes. There's all sorts of them out there. Oftentimes, I personally add kelp and humic acids to my tea. I'll add kelp at the beginning with the worm castings and some humic acids at the end. It just helps with root growth. But if you're just using worm castings, it's an excellent source of beneficial microbes for your soil. And we're trying to make our soil living, so we're adding a lot of living things to it. I like to pull the worms out just before putting them in there. They will survive. I've brewed teas for 3 days and shockingly the worms come out just fine, but I don't want to put them through that. We'll just throw them back in the worm bin so they can keep reproducing and they can keep making more worms and more beneficial microbes. The cool thing about worm compost versus traditional compost, you get a lot of beneficial bacteria and also digestive enzymes from the worm's gut introduced into your soil. So the benefit of that is if you have all these digestive enzymes that are meant for breaking down roots and organic material, you'll break down the old roots left over from your last harvest or from last season. And it'll just turn into worm poop and awesome worm castings and nutrition for your plants right at the root zone, right at the source. All right, that looks pretty good. I'll add our small air stone to the center of this. This isn't an extra step. This isn't a requirement. I like the air stone in the center. It forces as much goodness out of the center of the tea bag out as possible. In the past, when I haven't used the air stone in the center, the center of the ball of the worm castings will actually be kind of dry, so I don't know if all the water is really passing through. But when I use this, I know the water is really moving through pretty quickly and really filtering out nicely. So I have one of these rubber cable ties that works great to secure the top. And I just have this in a washcloth. When we first got set up with our tea composter, it came with these little burlap bags that were just awesome. They held like 2 cups of worm castings. You could tie them off right at the handle of the bucket, but they disintegrate fairly quickly. Just a regular cheesecloth or washcloth, they don't seem to disintegrate as quickly, and they work awesome. They're They're easy, and everybody's got stuff like this laying around. You know, an old t-shirt you could cut up. And this is just, I have a carabiner to a little piece of wire. This just will cinch around and hold our tea bag in place. Feel free to let your tea bag wander the bucket as you're brewing. The reason why I like to secure it is when the tea bag's held in one spot a little more, you can let the head really brew, and the head is kind of how I determine the health of the tea. When the bag is able to move around like this, it will bust up the head. Like if you have a beer and you have the head and you start moving your finger around, the head will just kind of fall down on its own. And I like to judge, like I said, the health of the tea based on how the head looks. And if there's no head, sometimes I'll just add a little bit more molasses to it, and that'll be enough to get a head on it. For the molasses, approximately 2 tablespoons for the 5 gallons, or 4 gallons, just on a 5-gallon bucket. Big old glob. And if the tea looks a little flat in 24 hours, that's when I'll add some more molasses. Sometimes I won't. You know, a lot of times it's just bubbling over. I'll leave it alone, and we'll add some molasses at the very end before giving it, so the microbes have some food with them when you give it to your plants. Have a little stir stick that reaches the bottom of the bucket. You don't want your hand in here once it's brewing. It's going to be full of bacteria. So I'm just going to stir the molasses up a little bit because it'll stick to the bottom. We have just clean, pure water in the bucket. We have a really good water filtration system at Berkshire Worms. So if you're on city water, make sure you let the water in the bucket sit out for at least 24 hours. If not, there can be some chlorine left in the water, and that'll kill all the beneficial microbes you're trying to get. So if you're on city water and you think it may be chlorinated, your best bet's to use either bottled water or distilled water, or you can boil it. But the better the water, the better your tea's going to come out. So that's good. Just enough to get the molasses stirred up. We'll drop our big stone in. And top tip for the winter time, our water comes out at like 40 degrees in the winter time. So I'll use a 50-watt aquarium heater in the very bottom of the bucket, and that keeps it right between 68 and 72 degrees, which is really what you want, somewhere between 68 and 72. It's June right now, so we're at a perfect 72 degrees in here, I think. So now we'll just plug it in, set it and forget it. We'll check in 24 hours and give it in 48 hours. Make sure your air pump is above the top of your bucket. It can siphon back into the pump. If my pump, well, the cord's not long enough, but if my pump was down here, water can backtrack through your tubing and come into your pump. So make sure it's above your top layer, or the top level of your bucket. I'm going to put a lid on, but I won't seal it. We want as much air getting through here as possible, so the lid's just to prevent splatters like this. I mean, it's full of bacteria, so it's less than ideal to have that splattered all over your walls. I'm going to go wash my hands super good, and we'll come back in 24 hours.